They say trust is the foundation of every marriage. For years, I believed my life was perfect. Loving wife, amazing son, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. I prided myself on the stability I had worked so hard to build. Every morning, I left for work with the confidence that my family was safe and happy. But life has a cruel way of revealing the truth when you least expect it. One evening, as I returned home from work, I noticed my son sitting alone in the living room. His shoulders were slouched, his face pale, and his eyes red as if he'd been crying. "Hey, champ, everything all right?" I asked casually, though a knot of worry began forming in my stomach. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked away, biting his lip, tears welling up in his innocent eyes. My heart sank as I knelt down in front of him. "Talk to me, buddy. What's wrong?" Finally, his dam broke. Tears streamed down his face as he sobbed. "Dad, I didn't mean to, but I walked into your room and saw Mom. She was with another man." I froze. My mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. "What do you mean, son? What exactly did you see?" He gulped and whispered through trembling lips. "She was on her knees and a man doing wrong with her, and the man saw me. He told me if I told anyone, he'd end me." It felt like my entire world shattered in that moment. My son, my little boy, had not only been exposed to something no child should ever witness, but had been threatened in his own home. My home. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war, and I knew exactly how I was going to fight back. The house had never felt emptier. As the days passed after the chilling conversation with my son, I tried to keep things normal. My usual routine consisted of work, the occasional dinner with my wife, and just keeping the facade intact for our son. But inside, everything was changing. I felt as though I was living in a parallel universe, where nothing was as it seemed, and everything was slipping away. The calmness in the house was nothing more than a thin veil, barely holding together the truth of what was unfolding. Sarah acted like nothing had changed. Her smiles were forced, her conversations shallow. She didn't know I knew about Eric, about the betrayal. She didn't realize that every word she spoke, every touch she made, was now part of an intricate performance. I could feel her trying to cling to what we had, but deep down, I knew it was already over. I went through the motions. Each morning, I'd leave for work, trying to keep up appearances. The same old routine: grab my coffee, kiss her goodbye, tell our son to be good at school. But as soon as I walked out the door, the storm inside me raged on. My mind would replay the moment my son walked into our bedroom, the moment he saw his mother on her knees, and the sickening thought that someone else had taken my place in the life I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't escape that image, and it haunted me, gnawing away at my resolve. During those days, I did everything I could to stay focused, but I knew the truth. Sarah's charm, her careful facade, couldn't disguise the reality of what had happened. She had betrayed me. She had let another man into our home, into our bed, into our lives. And she had done it all with such ease, without remorse, without hesitation. My son, on the other hand, was a silent observer. I could see the way his eyes avoided me sometimes, the guilt in his expression when he thought I wasn't looking. He wanted to tell me the truth. I could feel it in every silent glance we shared. But he was a kid, caught between two worlds. A world of loyalty to his mother, and a world of reality, where his father was the one who had been hurt. In the evenings, Sarah would cook dinner, and we'd sit at the table, pretending to be a family. She'd ask about my day, but her eyes never met mine for long. There was something in her voice, a tremor, a hesitancy, that I couldn't ignore. Every smile she gave me felt hollow. Every compliment she offered was like a knife twisting in my chest. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. I wanted to, more than anything. I wanted to storm into our living room and shout, demand answers, accuse her of everything. I wanted to burn every ounce of trust I had left in her. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had my revenge planned. I couldn't let her know that I knew the truth, not until the time was right. The calm before the storm, as it turned out, was a delicate balancing act. Every moment of peace, every conversation, every trivial exchange was nothing more than a prelude to the chaos I knew was coming. I had to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The longer I waited, the more the anger simmered, the more the pain built up inside me, threatening to spill over at any moment. And then the phone call came. I had been sitting in my study, going over some old notes when my phone rang. The number was unrecognizable, but there was something about it that made my pulse quicken. I answered it without thinking, and the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "Is this the husband of Sarah Thompson?" the voice asked, a cold, clinical tone to it. "Who's asking?" I replied, trying to mask the growing dread in my chest. The voice didn't answer directly, but instead said, "We have some information you might want to know." I stood up, my knees suddenly weak. I could feel the storm gathering inside me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. "We've been following your wife for a while," the voice continued, "and we've got footage of her with another man. It's not just any man either. It's someone you know." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I was numb for a moment, but then the fury came rushing in. This was no coincidence. Someone had been watching Sarah, someone who had seen it all, everything that I had been blind to. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We've got footage of her with Eric. You might want to see it for yourself." The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, as the realization hit me. Sarah's affair wasn't just a random fling. It was deliberate. It was calculated. And now, I had all the proof I needed. I had a decision to make. I could confront her immediately, tear down everything she'd built in a moment of fury. Or I could bide my time, plan my revenge, and destroy her slowly, methodically. The anger that had been simmering inside me exploded, but I knew this wasn't the time to act in haste. No, I needed to watch her. I needed to watch how she would behave, how she would try to cover her tracks. I wanted to see just how far she would go to deceive me. That night, I stayed up late, watching the video footage. It was grainy, but there was no mistaking what was happening. Sarah was in a hotel room with Eric, laughing, kissing, and doing everything she had promised me she would never do. The betrayal was so raw, so visceral, that it almost felt like my world had ended. But I couldn't let it end like this. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I walked into the living room and saw her sitting on the couch, her back to me. She turned and smiled, as if everything was fine, as if we were still the couple we once were. But I knew better. This was the calm before the storm, and I was ready to unleash it. The days following my son's revelation felt like a blur. My mind was racing with thoughts of what to do next. I couldn't just let this go. The betrayal cut too deep, and my need for justice was unrelenting. But I knew this wasn't a time for hasty decisions. Revenge required patience, precision, and most importantly, control. Eric wasn't some random guy from the gym. As I traced his movements over the next few days, I discovered a horrifying truth. He wasn't just my wife's lover. He was someone from my past. Someone I had once competed with in every area of life. In high school, Eric had been my rival, always trying to outshine me, whether it was sports, academics, or even relationships. He had hated me then, and it seemed he still held a grudge. This new information didn't just fuel my anger, it gave me clarity. I couldn't just destroy him in a moment of rage. I needed to make sure he felt every ounce of my revenge. I wanted him to suffer, to lose everything. But most of all, I wanted him to believe it was all his fault, without him ever knowing that I was behind it. So I made a plan. A meticulous, calculated plan that would hit him where it hurt the most: his pride. I had learned that Eric had a side hustle in flipping cars. He loved to brag about his ability to turn a profit on cheap, wrecked cars, always talking about how much money he made on the side. This was my opening. I knew he'd be too arrogant to question an opportunity to make more money. I reached out to him under a fake name, pretending to be someone looking to invest in high-end vehicles. He didn't hesitate for a second before agreeing to meet up. I arranged to meet him at a diner late at night, where we discussed potential deals. He was so eager to show off his expertise that he didn't even notice how closely I was studying his every move. During our meeting, I made sure to act impressed by his success. I even mentioned I was willing to make a big purchase if he could prove his worth. This was to make him feel like he was in control, like he was winning. But I had already made up my mind. I wasn't just going to buy a car. I was going to destroy his life. The night we met, I followed him back to his apartment. I needed to ensure I had all the information about his routine before I made my next move. I knew he parked his car in the same spot every night, a designated space right in front of his building. It was too easy. That night, after he'd gone inside and the lights in his apartment went dark, I quietly made my way to his car. My hands were steady, my mind sharp. I had been preparing for this moment for days, and I was ready. First, I took the spare key I'd cleverly swiped during our meeting and unlocked his car. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't allow myself to panic. This was the moment of truth. Next, I poured gasoline, lots of it, into the car's interior. I was careful not to spill it, ensuring the liquid was evenly spread across the seats, dashboard, and floor. The smell of gasoline was sharp, suffocating, but I ignored it. This was part of the plan. I took my time, making sure the car was soaked through. I wasn't just starting a fire. I was making sure it would be a spectacle, something Eric would never forget. As I doused the car, I noticed a small explosive device in my bag. It was something I had acquired from a reliable source. A small ignition charge, enough to light the gasoline quickly, but not cause any permanent damage. I placed it under the driver's seat. The explosion would be loud, designed to draw attention and send a message, but it would be nothing more than a shock. Satisfied with the setup, I stepped back, pulled out a lighter, and ignited the fuse. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, there was a soft click, followed by the sudden roar of flames erupting from under the car. The fire spread fast, devouring the interior in seconds, the heat of the blaze lighting up the street. The sight of the flames consuming his car was exhilarating, but it wasn't just the fire I was after. It was the destruction that would follow. I had one last move. As the car burned, I used a hidden USB drive, loaded with photos, texts, and explicit evidence of Eric's affair with my wife. To my advantage. Before the fire could fully destroy everything, I made sure to mail the USB drive to Eric's workplace, his gym, and even to a few of Sarah's closest friends. I wanted them to know exactly who he was, what he had done, and, more importantly, I wanted Sarah to believe that Eric had single-handedly destroyed his own life. By morning, Eric's car was reduced to ashes, and his reputation had been set ablaze just as thoroughly. His boss received the damning evidence and wasted no time in firing him. His gym membership was revoked, his pride shattered. And as for Sarah, she was left in the dark, thinking Eric had ruined his own life. As the sun rose on the following day, I knew my revenge had been a success. Eric would never know it was me. He would never suspect the quiet, calm man who had once been his rival. The morning after Eric's car was destroyed, I could feel the weight of the revenge settle over me like a dark cloud. But it wasn't enough. No, I needed to ensure that everything Eric thought he knew about his life was ripped away from him. The anger had subsided into a cold, unrelenting determination. I had watched him rise, and now I would watch him fall. Sarah's panic was the first sign that things had already begun to unravel. The moment she came home, I could tell something was off. Her eyes were wild, and she was frantic, her hands shaking as she paced the kitchen. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice deliberately calm. She looked at me, her face pale. "Eric's car. Someone destroyed it last night. He's furious, and I think he's blaming me. He's saying that I'm the one who's behind it all. I took a slow sip of my coffee, not missing a beat. Why would he blame you? I asked, as if I didn't already know. She didn't answer immediately, but her eyes betrayed her panic. She was clearly trying to process what was happening, but the truth was slowly sinking in. I knew she wasn't the only one in fear. He's losing everything, she whispered, looking as though she might break down at any moment. His job, his reputation, the car, it's all falling apart. And I think someone's trying to ruin him. He's blaming me for everything. I watched her for a moment, noting how easily she turned the blame on herself. But there was no sympathy in me, not anymore. She had lost her right to any kind of consideration when she chose to betray me. I stood up and walked toward her, keeping my gaze steady. Sarah, you don't get to play the victim here. Eric thought he could threaten our family and get away with it. He thought he could walk into our lives, disrespect our son, and destroy what we had. And you thought you could betray me, play house with him, and have no consequences. Her face twisted with confusion and fear. What are you saying? Do you know who did this? Please tell me. I didn't answer her immediately. Instead, I reached for an envelope on the counter and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands, her eyes scanning it for an explanation. Read it, I said coldly. She opened the envelope, her hands trembling as she pulled out the divorce papers. Her eyes widened in shock as she read the words, her voice breaking. What is this? You can't be serious. We can fix this. We can work through it. We can fix everything. Please don't do this to me. I stepped back, folding my arms across my chest. It's too late for fixing, Sarah. The moment you made your choice, you sealed your fate. You chose him over our family, over everything we built. And now, you will pay the price. She dropped the papers, her hands now covering her face in anguish. Please, she begged. I don't know what to do. I've lost everything. You've lost everything because you threw it all away, I replied, my voice steady. And as for Eric, don't worry. He'll have plenty of time to reflect on his decisions. He'll be out of a job, his reputation destroyed, and his life will be in ruins, all because of his own arrogance. I paused for a moment, savoring the satisfaction of seeing Sarah's world crumble around her. You won't be seeing him again, I added, my words cold and final. Please, she begged again, her voice desperate. Can't we just talk about this? For our son's sake? I met her gaze, my face stone cold. Your son already knows the truth. He doesn't need you anymore. You've lost him too. You've lost everything, Sarah. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the room. I could feel her eyes on me, but I refused to look back. She had made her choice. Now she would live with the consequences. That afternoon, I filed for full custody. I didn't want to waste time, and I didn't want to give Sarah the chance to manipulate the situation. Our son was with me now, and he would stay with me. I also made sure the divorce papers were filed with the courts. This wasn't a hasty decision. I had thought it through. I wanted her to feel every inch of this betrayal, to experience the pain I had felt for months. There was no going back now. The next time I saw Sarah was at the final court hearing. She was a shell of the woman I had once loved. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow with guilt and regret. But there was no pity in me, not anymore. She had destroyed everything, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. The hearing went exactly as I expected. I was granted full custody of our son, and the divorce was finalized without much resistance from her. It was clear that Sarah had no power left in the situation. She had lost everything, and there was no one left to fight for her. As we left the courthouse, my son at my side, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The battle had been long, but it was over. I had gotten my revenge, and now it was time to focus on rebuilding my life and my relationship with my son. I looked down at him, a slight smile tugging at my lips. We're going to be okay, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. We're going to be okay. The days following the divorce were a blur of paperwork, legal battles, and the heavy weight of finality. But amid the chaos, one thing remained clear. My son. He was my focus, my reason for everything. When Sarah left, the house felt emptier than I had ever imagined. The silence was suffocating at first, but it wasn't long before my son and I found our rhythm. We spent more time together than ever: movies, games, and late-night talks. I could see him healing, slowly but surely. It wasn't easy, but we were in this together, and that was all that mattered. I had no illusions about what had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. It wasn't something that could just be wiped away with time. But I was determined not to let my son grow up thinking that this was how relationships were meant to be. I would teach him to respect himself, to value trust, and to never settle for anything less than loyalty. Sarah? She tried to reach out a few times, begging for reconciliation, but I never responded. I knew the damage was irreparable. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. It wasn't just the affair that broke us. It was the lies, the manipulation, and the way she had put her own desires before our family's well-being. I could never respect someone who would choose deceit over honesty. The last time I saw Sarah was at the final court hearing. She looked different, aged, haggard, like someone who had been carrying the weight of guilt for far too long. But even then, I didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her bed. It was time for her to lie in it. As I walked out of the courthouse with my son by my side, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The storm was over. We had weathered it, and now we could finally rebuild our lives. We moved to a new place soon after, away from the memories of the past. My son and I started fresh, and as we settled into our new home, I realized that no matter how hard the road had been, we had made it through stronger and closer than ever. Life was never going to be the same. But I had learned one thing: revenge may have given me a sense of justice, but healing would come through love and loyalty. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so and press the notification bell. This way, you'll stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.